Welcome to Tech Talks. Our security edition today is focused on Phantom slash commands. Tech Talks is a series of short webinars that are deep dives for technical practitioners. We value you, our customer, and want you to continue in your Splunk journey. Our experts help create these best practices, and we want you to leverage them in your daily role. I'm Olivia Courtney, a security product marketing specialist, and I'm excited to introduce my colleague, Ian Richardson.
Hey, my name is Ian Richardson, and I am a security specialist at Splunk. Today I'm going to be speaking about what slash commands are and how they accelerate your Phantom investigations and response, particularly by allowing you to run a playbook without ever having to leave your command line interface.
So here's the plan for today. We'll give you an overview of the Phantom command line interface. We'll explain what a slash command is and why it matters to you. We'll show you how to use slash commands to your full potential, and we'll provide you with additional resources to continue on your Splunk journey. We're also available for Q&A throughout this presentation. Take it away, Ian.
Thanks, Olivia. Slash commands are a great capability within Phantom that save you time and effort during your investigations, while building playbooks, and much more. And with that, I'm going to jump into the user interface so I can explain why.
All right, so first things first, what are slash commands and where in Phantom can you use them? Slash commands are commands typed into the comment box of a Phantom event that allow you to access and inspect data, run actions, run playbooks, create notes, and set event attributes against the event that you're working on, all without ever having to leave your keyboard. A big part of the power here is the flexibility to pass multiple pieces of data into actions and more on the fly as you're conducting an investigation. And today we're going to walk through specific examples of where this can be useful. So to start, let's go to the top left menu dropdown, and we're going to navigate over to Sources. And from here, it's going to bring us to the Analyst queue, and we'll go ahead and jump into the malicious URL request attempts up here at the top. And from here, down at the bottom left, you'll notice where the comment box is. This is also where we can invoke these slash commands. So I'm going to go ahead and select this, and first thing I'll do is type in a slash, and it's going to give us all of the options that we have for slash commands that are at our disposal. Going from top to bottom, the first is we can run an individual action, we can create a note, edit a container attribute, run a playbook or multiple playbooks, and inspect a given data path or a list of data paths, all from these slash commands. So let's start with the action. I'll type that in, and as soon as I type in action, you'll notice that it's now going to give me, in the comment box, all of the parameters that we need to pass to run this action. So when I space, it's actually going to give us all of the options now for actions that are set up in Phantom. And this is going to be dependent on the assets you have configured in your Phantom instance. So for this one, let's go ahead and do Geolocate Ip. Once I type that in and give a space, you'll notice now that we get to the app. One thing that's great is that instead of having to type everything in, we can actually use Tab or Enter to select an option and autocomplete with that. And at this point, now we need to pass in an IP address to run Geolocate IP against. We'll use 8.8.8 in this example. Finally, you'll notice that we have the option to pass in the asset. In this case, I know I only have one asset for MaxMind, but in other cases, if you have multiple assets for an app, you'll need to specify this parameter. For completeness, I'll go ahead and do it. Asset MaxMind, and then I'll click Enter to run the slash command. So you'll notice now we've gone ahead and initiated our Geolocate IP action, and it's brought that information back to us. So with that, let's talk about the next slash command. Next, we have Note, and Note takes two parameters, a title and content. So for example, if I pass an example title, and this is the description, and click Enter, it'll go ahead and create that note for us down here. Next, we have Set a container attribute. So if I type in set, once again, it takes two parameters, and the attributes that you can change in your container include the name, the label, the owner ID, status, severity, and sensitivity. As I have these options up here, we can actually select through them by using the up and down arrows. And so, for example, if I wanted to change the status, I can go to Status, click Enter, and then give a value. In this case, the status right now is new, and I'll go ahead and change that now to Open. In addition, if I wanted to set the name, I could go ahead and do, maybe call this slash commands example. And then finally, I'll go ahead and set the owner to myself. Awesome. Next one we have is Playbook. And Playbook also takes two parameters. And the first parameter is the name or the ID of the playbook. Now for the name, the way we need to list this out is by repo first. So for example, if you wanted to use a community repo, you could type that out. If you wanted to use a local repo, you type that out. And then separating the repo with a slash, then we'll type in the name of the playbook. So in this case, maybe we want to use our investigate community playbook. And then the second parameter is the scope. In this case, we could type in scope, which is all. And as we run that, it will now run our investigation playbook against this event. The last slash command is the inspect slash command. And before we run this, in case you don't know how to use these or forget for whatever reason, very similar to a command line utility, you have the ability to pass in -h or --help, click enter, and it will actually explain how to use the slash command, what it supports, and so forth. So for inspect, as we can read here, there are 3 supported objects: action run, app run, and artifact. And it will bring back the data paths and flatten it in this recent activity pane to be able to help you understand what that data looks like. And this is particularly useful when you are debugging playbooks, building playbooks, or if you wanted to get more information as you're running through an investigation about an event. What are all the URLs that are part of this event, for example? So let's go ahead and actually do that right now. If I type in /inspect, and now I know in order to get any artifacts, I'll start with artifact. From there, I'm going to type in :, and then pass in the data path that I need here. So this can be used both with stars, for example, if I wanted to get all artifacts back, or in this case, if I wanted just to get the request URL, I can type that in directly. Now, when I click enter, it will bring back the one request URL that exists in this event. And the benefit here is once we inspect this, now we can actually take those data paths and pass them back into actions. So for example, I'll go ahead and run an action again. And instead of running the Geolocate Ip action, let's do URL reputation. Now in this case, we're going to use our virus total app. And instead of typing in an URL, we're going to actually pass it a data path. So in this case, I'll type in artifact request URL and then enter. And now it's gone ahead and run, based off of this request URL, the URL reputation against it. So we can already see that this has 1 positive and 66 total scans. Last but not least, of the basics, before we go through kind of a real-life example, very similar to how you would have on a command line interface, you have history in a session with slash commands. So you can click the up and down arrows to go back to old commands that you've kicked off. And this can be particularly useful if you're doing some testing. You want to have the ability to potentially update a custom list, for example, and you're adding the same rows or columns back. You can just click up, enter, it will run it, and it will bring you back to the same state that you wanted before. Now, one thing that's really, really important to note is that once you leave or reload the investigation workbench page for your event, all of the slash command history will go away. So I know what you're thinking right now. On the recent activity pane, these slash commands can really make it noisy. But don't fret, if you do reload this, as I said, it will go ahead and take away all that history. So now it's a much cleaner interface that we're looking at here. And still we can note that some of these were run from the CLI, by the CLI initiated call out. So with that, let's jump back to the analyst queue and jump into a more realistic example. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the host with multiple infections. And this is an example of something that may have come from your SIM as an endpoint compromise that was detected. And so we have all the key value pairs from Splunk here that are passed in that we now have access to. So first things first, let's imagine I didn't know the artifact. I could jump right into the command line interface and start using my slash commands. So first things first, let's go ahead and set the status of this to open. I'm also going to set the owner to myself. And in addition to that, let's go ahead and inspect this and get a sense for, do we have, destination addresses within this? Interesting, so we have one IP address. Let me go kick off an action against this. We'll do IP reputation. And I'm going to go ahead and utilize our virus total app once again. I'll pass in the IP by passing it in through the data path, destination address, and click enter. And now we've kicked off the virus total action. So it looks like there's nothing that's come back from virus total. I'm going to go ahead and use our inspect again to see other information that we might have about this example. Now, once we bring this back, we can see the entire event flattened for us. So we can see the technique, the destination expected, minor attack tactic and technique, and so forth. And you know what? This might be interesting to pass into the note. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in the MITRE attack technique description into a note, and also pass in the IP address. So let's go ahead and type that in. I'm going to do the inspect artifact, and then MITRE attack technique description. And so now that we have that data path, let's go ahead and pass that into a note. So I'm going to label the notes verdict and findings. And then I'm going to go ahead and start typing some stuff in. So it looks to me that this IP address, then we can pass in the IP address. So we'll do that with the artifact, and then destination address is not malicious based off of what VirusTotal told us. The detection in Splunk seems to believe that this was a spear phishing attack. Here is the MITRE attack definition. And then from here, we can actually pass that in as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in artifact, and then the MITRE attack technique definition. Let's go ahead and do that. And we've gone ahead now and added the note. Now the benefit here is it would have been a pain to go ahead and copy all this into this section, but in this case, we've gone ahead and done this pretty quickly. It also takes from that text all of the links and actually allows you to be able to use these. So if I wanted to look into user execution, we could actually see that going into MITRE attack directly. So this is actually super, super useful to be able to pass in this data dynamically into these notes when needed. Now, last but not least, going back here, if we were to continue this on, maybe what we do is we'd set the severity to low. And I'm also going to go ahead and set the name to something different. So let's go ahead and call this suspected spear phishing attempt. And then we can go ahead and now pass that IP address in one more time. So artifact source address or destination address. Awesome. So now that that's done, let's go ahead and close the event. We'll set the status to closed, and let's go move on to our next event. So in addition to being helpful in investigation workflow, slash commands can also be helpful when debugging and testing in other scenarios. So let's go ahead and jump into this ASN transaction. And in this scenario, let's imagine we have two playbooks, one of which that is making a stateful change to the environment, whether it's changing a custom list, for example, every time it runs, or it's making a change to the event. Oftentimes when we're testing that, it can be tedious to go in and make the manual changes to change the state back. So let's imagine we have two examples here. We have a playbook called remove list, and this will be the playbook that we're testing. And we have a playbook called add to list. And this is the one that is maintaining state in between us testing the remove list playbook. So in this playbook, very, very simple. All we're doing is removing a list, a custom list from Phantom. And the first time we run this, the way this will work is we'll be able to go ahead and paste in our test event, the ASN transaction event, run test, and it's running from top to bottom perfectly well, right? But because we've made a stateful change, it could break down in the future. Now, if we run it again, now we see we're failing to delete the list because it doesn't exist, right? So that means that we need to now go into this other playbook here and potentially do this, right, to reinstate that. And that can sometimes be tedious if it's a lot of different steps. Maybe we don't have a playbook. Well, the benefit here of slash commands is that you can actually go in and, for example, pass in the playbook that we want to run to maintain state. So in this case, it's local add to list, and the scope is all. And we'll go ahead and run that. And now it's adding to list. Now, if I come back to remove list, I'm going ahead, I'm testing this, I run it. It's running from top to bottom as expected. I can come back here using our history, and we kind of go back and forth. Now, obviously, this is a very simple example, removing a list and adding back to that list. But in other situations, you might have a much more complex playbook that is making many different stateful changes to the environment. And this can save a lot of time by being able to very quickly roll back those changes. So the second example here is if you are running through playbooks and you're having trouble with data paths. So let's jump in to an email example. And in this one, we have a bunch of different artifacts here. We have our email artifacts and so forth, and these can be often complex in the amount of headers that you have, and accessing these data paths sometimes can be a very tedious process. So let's jump into another very simple playbook that we have here. This is called file triage, and it's very simply doing a filter to see if the onmicrosoft.com domain is in a specific set of artifacts, and if not, doesn't do anything. If it is, it's going to go ahead and filter that and kick off the playbook, right? And this really, the next step doesn't matter as much. I just want to focus on how this can be sometimes troublesome to troubleshoot, and slash commands can help. So in this case, we'll go into debug, paste in the event ID, and run it. And what you'll notice here is we have filter, but we don't have the next step taking place, in this case, kicking off the playbook. And when we look into the logs here, it's returning none in every single one of the artifacts that are being returned here, and therefore the result is coming back as false. So if we go back to the event and we take the data path that we're trying right here, and we do inspect artifact 2, we can see here that none of the data paths actually had any data for this artifact 2 data path. So let's actually take a deeper dive here, and we'll jump into maybe a little bit more of a generalized one. So if we do inspect artifact : it's going to bring back all of the artifacts here. And very quickly we can see that this artifact, because of these brackets, is a more complex artifact than we think. It's got multiple objects within it. So looking into the artifact now, if I jump in and take a look at the email headers, it looks like the 2 is actually underneath this. So if I inspect, I can confirm that. We'll go once again to artifacts, and in this case we're going to do email headers .2. Now we've actually found the email address that we were looking for prior. So going back to the playbook, we can make the adjustment, and instead of seth.2, we really want it to be email headers 2. We can go ahead and save this playbook, run the debug again, and now in this case we've actually gone ahead and moved on to running the playbook. And we can see that now here in running the playbook on this event. So I hope this has been helpful. Once again, slash commands are a great way to enhance your investigation tactics in Phantom and also help you from a debug perspective when working with automations and playbooks alike. With that, I'm going to pass it back over to you, Courtney.
Thank you, Ian. We're about ready to wrap up this tech talk, but before we do, I wanted to share quick resources available to you to continue on your Splunk journey. You'll receive these assets in a follow-up email as well as this recording. Check out Splunk Docs, where we have further documentation on Phantom's command line interface and data path. If you're ready to try Phantom for yourself, try our free community edition. And if you have any product feedback or suggestions, drop us an idea at ideas.splunk.com. Finally, don't forget that we have an incredible community of Splunk users on our community site. You can search the answers section on Phantom Join Logic, and you can continue the conversation for this talk within the discussion section called Tech Talks. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to join us today. Please tune back in for future Tech Talks. We're excited to share this series with you.